AlinGuard, Bloodstorm. They passed through the building into the darkened hall where they found no resistance. As the opening on the far side crept closer, they could hear orders being given. Not arrows, not swords, but crank. Hug the wall, Shifa shouted. That same second, a twang like a 10-ton crossbow ripped through the air. Shifa put his hands out before him, thumbs and index fingers nearly touching. A ballista bolt large enough to kill a dragon rushed down the hall. His kinstones bled light. One on his armor shattered in a squealing whine that set his teeth on edge. A deep resounding steel clang accompanied the bolt to the ground. Shifa was so supercharged he was vibrating in place. Get your weapons ready, Shifa strained against the universal force that was trying to tear him apart. A second later, the command. Go. Roru took a single step, then vanished from sight. Bindlin, go. Bindlin stepped forward and vanished into the light. Prince, go. Dritten stepped forward, but his foot didn't hit the ground. He soared forward a dozen feet before he ever started to descend. When his foot did hit the ground, it was in a dream slow motion. He felt every pound as it came down on his foot. He could feel each muscle flex and to absorb and disperse the impact. His hair was straight back, the hide of a porcupine, and tears streaked the sides of his face. He immediately went into a controlled slide. He surfed along the ice for 30 feet before coming to a stop. He looked at Bindlin, who was moving fast and slow at the same time. It didn't make sense. Roru had fashioned himself a flail and was at that moment swinging it without resistance through a man's face. The man's head took a lifetime to come apart. Dritten saw every crack and wrinkle spread across his face as the conjured weapon made room for itself inside the man's skull. Dritten looked at the soldiers, grim men, veterans of war, and they were totally silent. One man was jumping, but he didn't move. He hung there as though frozen in time. Bindlin swung his axis slowly, a slash that an adult child could avoid, but the woman he swung at just stared at the killing blow as it opened her up from collarbone to kneecap. She peeled open like a flower. Blood bloomed in the space where there used to be flesh rushing out of her like juice from an overripe fruit. He watched confusion take root in her eyes as her body told her brain things it couldn't understand. Prince! Kill, Shifa said, running up behind. He covered 15 feet in a stride, moving both too fast and too slow to be real. Dritten watched the Southern King go through 20 men like a plague. That strange purple blade was 20 feet long, and where he swung it, one man became two. Well, Dritten thought, if they're just going to stand there. Dritten rushed into the fray. He swung his blade to bat aside a man's sword and watched the man's hand shatter like crystal as the weapon sang and ever so slowly flew away. He watched the blade for a second, finally understanding what had happened. When Roru disappeared, when Bindlin disappeared, they didn't vanish. They were moving too fast to see. Was he moving that fast? Dritten picked a new target. The blade went through the man's helm, face, and neck without so much as a jerk of resistance. Seconds ticked by before the sound of the strike ever blossomed into existence. He watched in muted horror as the young man's bright green eye blinked too slowly to close before he died. He saw blood-seeking veins no longer there, spread in a spray of crimson rubies, checkering the scene behind them. His brains pumped clear fluid out into the frozen breeze. He saw the exact moment man becomes meat and howled with sadistic glee. A part of him was excited. The rest of him was terrified at wielding this kind of power. He thought back to every moment when punching Shifa in the face seemed like a good idea and said a silent prayer to whatever god stayed his hand. The four of them moved through the enemy ranks, mowing down men by the handful. Over his initial shock, Dritten went to work. He didn't swing hard, he didn't need to. A nick would open a man wide. Necks became prime targets, throats peeled apart, heads flew free in swirling spirals of surprised expressions and deflating torsos. Racing hearts forced their necks to spray blood like a sneeze as they died without ever knowing they fought. It didn't take long.